If there was ever one or two things that I would say I completely overlooked and completely did not understand the importance of just a year ago, one of those things would absolutely be design pillars. I think design pillars are super, super important now, and I would not make a game without them. I think the one exception to that is maybe game jams where everything's too hectic and chaotic to really define what you're making until it's done. But any game I were to make outside of a game jam, I would absolutely include design pillars. And we're going to talk about why that's important, what they are, and maybe some of the differences between pillars and rules in this video. So real quick to get started, what is a design pillar? In UX, there are these things called pillars. When I did some studying on UX, when I read up on about it, because I was doing a lot of consulting for business and marketing and a lot of startup tech stuff, UX was a really important part of that. And one of the things that I learned was this concept of a pillar, of this thing that you create that kind of guides your design, or the core things that are important to the user that cannot be questioned. Like, what are the core values of what you're trying to create that need to come across in everything that you do? And adapted to games, I think a lot of companies now use game design pillars that reflect kind of what the game is that they're trying to build. Because the bigger your team gets, the harder it gets to determine what it is you're trying to build. And if you don't have something to guide your team along the way, you can get lost in this muddiness of people. But the same thing is true given an individual like myself, a solo indie, with enough time, because now suddenly I'm the only one working on it, but I've got all this time. I play all these games. I get lost in all this stuff. I think I need that feature and that feature and that feature, and this and that, and this cool thing and that cool thing, and it can go on forever. So design pillars kind of help you hone in what it is you're trying to create. So real quick, I have a video about using rules to constrain your design. I want to link that right here because I think it's a separate issue. The main difference that I want to explain between game design rules in your project and game design pillars are that pillars are more general and vague, and they guide the design of the thing. Rules are more specific, and they would basically, rules would tell you what not to do, right? Like, because it's super specific and you're not supposed to do that. Design pillars would kind of force you to think in a certain way and think about what's important. So I want to share 3 of my design pillars for my game Phylophobia, and I want to kind of discuss why they are what they are, and then kind of how you can create design pillars and some of the considerations to take in. So the 3 pillars for my game, number 1 is emotional journey reflected in gameplay. Number 2 is psychological horror and mystery with religious undertone. And number 3 is minimalistic understanding but difficult execution in gameplay. Those are the 3 general design pillars that I have for Phylophobia. These have changed 100 times. They may change again in the future. But what I've noticed is that they don't tend to change drastically. They tend to evolve into like better versions of themselves, essentially. Like one of the pillars I had originally was no combat. And it was just straight up no combat. But what I've realized is, like, there are instances that could be considered combat where the character interacts with the enemies. And so I've kind of modified that, right? It's a minimalistic understanding but difficult execution in gameplay. So I want something that's really easy to understand, but I want something that is takes some skill and mastery to execute. And I've taken, even though one of the rules that I kind of have is no player-initiated combat, my design constraints are more general, or my design pillars rather are a little bit more general. And I feel like this has helped me design a lot of stuff. And if you notice, the main difference between like some of the rules that we talked about and some of these design pillars is the design talks a lot about the mood, the emotion, the feeling, the UX, right? The rules talk about the things that happen, the specific things that can happen, the things that you're not allowed to do. Like no combat would be a rule. Minimalistic understanding and difficult execution would be a pillar, because I want to make something that is easy to understand but difficult to master. And that's different than no combat, which is very specific. So this has helped me a lot in a lot of different ways, because As a solo indie, I want to throw the kitchen sink into the project. I want to throw everything. Every time I play a different game, like Hollow Knight or any games that are like similar, Ori and the Blind Forest, like games that I feel come close to Philophobia with the emotional feeling and the storytelling and stuff like that. I want to add some of those features into my game, and it takes a lot for me to say, does this fit or does it not? And before, there was no real way to do this. And when I created the one-page game design document, which you can find here if you're looking for something like that, my intention was to kind of create something that at a glance I could show someone else and they could understand what I was creating. But also, when if I go 2 weeks or 4 weeks, without working on something outside of the game, or I take a break or whatever it is, I can come back to it and say, okay, this is what I'm making. And one of the core parts of that document is actually the design pillars. And I personally think 3 is the perfect number of design pillars, because I feel like any more than that, your message kind of gets muddied. And any less than that, I don't feel like you have enough substance to actually stick to. So, like for me, the psychological horror and mystery with religious undertone, that's a lot about the feeling of the game, right? Like I want this sense of like horror and mystery, but I also want this sense of like hell and demons and this kind of like unsettling, weird world. And I've noticed in some of my iterations, I seem to forget the religious piece to it, or I forget the mystery piece to it. I definitely have kind of strayed away from some of the actual horror part of it. Like I don't think there's a real horror element. Like the game is not scary, but I want the psychological horror. I don't necessarily want the jump scares or dark environments or like that kind of thing. But I want this psychological horror of this tortured person. And it took me a long time to come up with a pillar like that. That's probably the 10th iteration of that pillar, but it's kind of helped me design everything that I put into the game. I ask, how does it fit into this? Does it fit into this? Does it do that? And same thing with the emotional journey reflected in gameplay. Originally, that was just emotional journey, and that was way too vague for me to come up with something. And I realized that like playing through the game, the mechanics felt good, the jumping felt great, the enemies were cool, but it felt very disconnected from the story, right? Like this cutscene would play and it's like a movie, and then this game you would play through and then you would do some stuff, and like the two things felt very separate. So after many iterations, I came up with emotional journey reflected in gameplay, and so now the journey of this character is actually told through the things that you do, right? Not that this is what's happening to the character on the screen. No, it's like you're actually doing the thing. You're forced to do those things, and I feel like that is a much better approach to the game. So I know this is like specific to my game, but I don't have any like design pillars for anybody else's game, so I didn't know how to explain it. But I kind of hope I explain this concept, and I hope that I kind of shed some light on design pillars and why they're important. They definitely have helped me a ton in kind of reining in my ideas and designing something that's coherent. And again, they're going to evolve over time. They always do. But I thought I would share it with you guys. If there's any questions you have on this, if there's anything I wasn't clear about, ask that in the comments down below. If you have anything to add as far as like the way you do design pillars or any specifics that you want to share, leave those in the comments down below, because we always want to start a conversation. But my name is Tim Rustwick, and I will see you again tomorrow.